morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome. Welcome to session 2, the keynote session of the 4th annual multidisciplinary conference sponsored by the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at William Paterson University of New Jersey. This year's conference is titled Us and Them, the Paradox of Difference and Inequality in a Global Age. I want to begin the session by acknowledging and thanking all of the centers, departments, and programs that co-sponsored the conference, and without which today's gathering would be impossible. All of these programs, centers, and departments are listed on page 2 of the conference program. I also want to acknowledge our distinguished guests, Jim Clark, Police Chief of Wayne, New Jersey, Jonine Deloach, Director of the Southbourne Junior Year Experience Program, Kanisha Griffin of the Dream Builders Program, my apologies, Dean Ken Wolf of the College of Science and Health, and Dean Kara Rabbit of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. I also want to acknowledge and thank the conference committee members for their tireless and determined work during the spring 2015 and fall 2015 semesters. The committee members are listed in full on the back cover of today's program. A special thanks also to those individuals who are making our conference day run smoothly: Patrick Ryan and Roderick Holliday from Broadcast Support and Production, and Manny Coley and Clint Voltman of Hospitality Services. And last but surely not least, thanks to everyone in the Dean's Office of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences for their tireless efforts and unwavering support. And at this point, I ask that everyone please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Also, while the keynote session is in progress, please refrain from taking any photographs and making any audio or video recordings. The conference is being videotaped and will be available to the public in the near future. I now invite the president of William Paterson University of New Jersey, Dr. Kathleen Waldron, to come forward to formally welcome everyone to the conference and officially open our keynote session. Dr. Waldron.
Well, thank you, and welcome everyone to this conference today. We're so glad that I think it's going to be standing room only, but we are very pleased that so many students are here, as well as faculty and invited guests. One of the things that we strive to do at William Paterson University in various formats throughout the year during the academic calendar is to provide events, conferences, speeches, talks, debates, artistic productions to enrich the lives of our students. And many of you are here today because you're actively engaged in the topic that's going to be under discussion. I believe I've received emails and various correspondence from students over the course of the last couple of years, especially last year, and deeply care about some of the issues that are facing the United States and our society. And I am going to stay certainly for this talk because I'm very interested in certainly the topic, and also we are very fortunate to have our speaker today who is really a national expert on this, and we were happy that he was on the East Coast, not the West Coast, so he was able to come to our campus. But I just hope that all of you in the assignment part of the program, because I know some of you have assignments related in class, that you really think carefully about the presentation today and think what it means to you as citizens of New Jersey, as citizens of William Paterson University, and to incorporate and think intellectually and emotionally about the topic under discussion today. So welcome. I'm not doing the introduction. I'm just welcoming all of you, and thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Waldron. And now to our keynote speaker. We welcome the powerful insights of our distinguished visitor, Dr. Phillip Atiba Goff. Dr. Goff comes to us as a visiting scholar at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, where he is presently on leave from his full-time position as Associate Professor of Social Psychology at the University of California at Los Angeles. Dr. Goff's research interests include translational psychology, psychology and criminal justice, dehumanization, stereotype threat, intersectional identities, stigma, interracial conflict and discrimination, and mental representation. His work puts forth a new understanding of contemporary forms of racial bias, discrimination, and inequality, as well as the intersections of race and gender, by demonstrating how racial discrimination and racially unequal outcomes can also be produced by contextual factors and not solely by explicit or implicit racial attitudes. Dr. Goff has published his evidence-based research in numerous peer-reviewed journals and as book chapters and technical reports. His research has received the support of the National Science Foundation, the Department of Justice, the Russell Sage Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and the Woodrow Wilson, Ford, and Mellon Foundations, among others. In 2008, Dr. Goff co-founded the research and action think tank, the Center for Policing Equity, of which he now serves as president for research. The CPE brings together social science researchers and law enforcement practitioners to promote equity and inclusiveness between police departments and the communities they serve, as well as within those departments themselves. As a result of his work through the CPE across the nation and abroad, Dr. Goff was invited to be a witness for President Barack Obama's task force on 21st century policing, and has also presented before members of Congress and congressional panels, Senate press briefings, and White House advisory councils. And in 2013, as a result of his research and policy initiatives, Dr. Goff received the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy Rising Star Award. Most recently, Dr. Goff led the Center for Policing Equity in becoming one of 3 principal investigators for the U.S. Department of Justice's National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice. The National Initiative will contribute information to another major CPE project spearheaded by Dr. Goff, the first national database on racial disparities in police stops and use of force. The title of Dr. Goff's keynote presentation today is The Fire This Time: Race, Policing, and the Psychology of Justice in Contemporary America. After his presentation, the floor will be opened for questions from the audience. Please give a warm William Paterson University welcome to Dr. Phillip Atiba Goff.
Appreciate it, thank you. This working? Yeah, people can hear me in the back? Yep, all right. I have to start with great disappointment in part of Jason's introduction. He forgot the most important honor I ever received. I was best drawer in 2nd grade. My mother's very proud of that, so she'll forgive you. She'll forgive you. I want to thank the committee. I want to thank William Paterson University, President Waldron. I want to especially thank my good friend from long, long ago, back when I had hair, Jason Ambrose. It's really a treat for me to come here to William Paterson and to get a chance to speak to all of you. Just to reiterate one of the things that Jason said in the introduction, I want to share with you that new stuff, that good stuff, right? This is my mixtape before it went live. And in order to do that, we've got federally protected data in here. So when folks are saying, please don't take pictures if you're not part of the regular, and don't videotape, it's for y'all's sake. We don't want y'all committing a federal crime while you're listening to me. All right, so that's literally what we're talking about here. Some of this is HIPAA protected, so don't record it. For real, for real. Okay. The other thing before I sort of drop my stuff here is kind of a difference between, I really am a professional nerd, but I don't talk like professional nerds, okay? So though we are not in a black church, it's important for y'all to know that I am of the black church, which does not mean that you're going to be forced to say amen, though some of you may feel so moved. But it does mean that I'm used to call and response, right? So I'm going to ask whether or not you're with me from time to time. I'm going to ask for participation. If y'all could just grunt politely back at me, it's going to make me feel a lot more comfortable. So can y'all do that for me? Okay. Let me get to my topic here. This is the topic. For y'all who don't know about the fire next time, right? It's biblical and it's Baldwin, and when it's biblical and it's Baldwin, it must be good. The idea is that it won't be water, it'd be fire next time. This is the fire this time. I spent the last 2 days at Yale, and I just got a text message literally as I'm sitting here saying I'm likely to head out to Missouri next week. It is not an accident that we're talking about this while this is going on, right? And I think it's important to kind of contextualize all of the nerd stuff I'm going to talk about with the human stuff that's been part of doing this work. That's part of what I want to be able to share with y'all. So I'll tell you this story. I was visiting, it's before Ferguson, before Trayvon Martin, but I was visiting a police department in the middle states in the United States, and a chief said to me, hey, Dr. Goff, we're going to be okay. Our data say we're not as bad in terms of racial disparities as the county. The city's not as bad as the county. So this year, the stories are going to be about the county. But I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means that we're, real good and the county's okay. I don't know if it means the county is okay and we're great. I don't know if it means we're terrible and the county is just the devil incarnate. I can't tell. I don't know what the data mean. I don't know. But what I do know, and he said this to me, which shook me when he said it, I do know that we are one dead black teenager away from this whole place burning to the ground. I can't tell you which police chief that was because of the kind of research that I do. But the worst part about all this is you can't tell me where on earth this is, because this is Anytown, USA. And this is the context of the work that we've been doing for the last decade or so at CPE and then before that CPLE. The other thing I want to do before I ground this in the science, I want to ground this in the people. Right? It's really important that we get a sense of the families and the bodies and the folks who were part of a network of community that were taken off this earth. So it's useful to get that we were in New York the day that Eric Garner was killed. Right? We trained BART police after Oscar Grant was killed. We were down in Sanford, Florida, right after Trayvon Martin. And as important as this is, and I'm not going to do a great job of it today, it's important to push back against the androcentrism of the ways that we think about criminal justice and the ways that we've been thinking about criminal justice reform. So it's important to name Rekia Boyd, right? And Terrica Wilson, Yvette Smith, 93-year-old Pearlie Golden. And never to remember that Michael Brown Jr. had his father's name. So that's the first sets of context I really feel like it's important to have if I'm going to talk about the work that I've been up to. The other context is a little bit broader than that. We have absolutely no data nationwide on police behavior. We know about crime, we know about arrests, but we've got nothing nationally on police behavior, stops, use of force. Some of you are following the Mapping Police Violence or the Counted, the Guardian's got one, Washington Post has one. Those are crowdsourced pieces of data from newspapers. Right, we got about 18,000, roughly, police departments across the United States. 75% of them have 25 or fewer officers. Right? 75% have 25 or fewer officers. What is the major news source from which you can aggregate? It's the post-it board at the Piggly Wiggly and the local church circular. That is not making it into the Counted. Right? So our FBI Director James Comey says it's embarrassing the Guardian has better data on this than the FBI is true, but don't mistake that for nationally representative data. We got nothing. And the other important context, our way of thinking about race and racism is jacked up. It is all kinds of outdated, bombed out, and depleted. It doesn't work. So that's where and when I enter into this space. So the goals for the talk today, I like to give a roadmap because we're going to be taking some journeys through peaks and valleys. I want to talk about the need for a new, more time-sensitive, more contemporary language to make sense of what's going on right now. I'm going to suggest some, that's going to be the language of identity traps, talk about how that can help us develop a science of the problem, and then suggest that research can be a part of the solution. Right, those are the goals. Everybody kind of there with me? Yeah, okay. And it's going to take this kind of format in order. First, I'm going to introduce you to identity traps. Right? That's the term and the language I think is going to be useful. There's two different kinds, fast and slow. Right? And then we're going to talk about research as a lever, and then I'm going to wrap up. Okay? Everybody still there? We cool? Cool. Intro over. All right. So this, I'm going to hop down from here. I'm way more comfortable doing like a up and down the aisles. I may be in the back, turn you all around a little bit. Make sure everybody's staying awake all the way through. Because no one has ever said that a professor has spoken for too short a period of time, right? So this is the question that is my fundamental research question. This is the thing that starts me off from the time I was about 16 till now, almost every day. What causes discrimination? Think about it for a second. In your minds, how do you answer this question? What causes discrimination? For almost everyone in the United States, scientists, social scientists, politicians, student, for almost everyone the answer is this. It's bad people. Right? And the color of this devil changes depending on who you are and who you're trying to talk to, but it's bad people. Bad people, racists cause racism. Discriminators cause discrimination. Well, this creates the first problem, because that doesn't really fit with the data. What do I mean by that? Well, things have changed. This is taken from something called the Princeton Trilogy. Right? I'm a Harvard guy. I assume it's called the Princeton Trilogy because folks at Princeton don't get taught to count past 3. This is clearly 5 time courses. But these are, and this is my second apologies, we did androcentrism. We're going to be mostly in a black-white binary. Right? I live in America. I know we don't live in a black-white binary. The previous research is that way, but that's really no excuse. It's just that I only got about an hour and 15 to do my thing. So I apologize, hopefully in the Q&A, and obviously in respect to the conversation we just had immediately prior to this. Hopefully we'll get into that. But these are white endorsements of negative stereotypes about blacks, right? White people endorsing negative stereotypes about black, the percentage that do it. And what you'll see is in here, not only is superstition more than just a Stevie Wonder song, but, and a good one, over the 5 years, things get better. This is not political correctness. This is not people just figuring out, oh, well, shh, don't say the thing you really think. This is stuff getting better. It really got better, and I am kind of distressed sometimes the number of times I need to say to people, no, it's better now. Give me a choice between 1933 and 2000. I'm picking 2000 100 times out of 100 to be black. Right? It's better. And then we elected a black president and racism was over. No, probably not. So the more things change, right, the more they stay the same. This is now inequality. Okay? It's expressed as ratios of black to white. So that means if a black child was as likely to die in infancy as a white child, we'd see these bars over here at the 1. And what we see is that not only are the bars for infant mortality, unemployment, and poverty well above 1, but they're going up over time. The scientific response to this, the framing of this is, what the F? I'm being recorded. What the heck? How do we make sense of that? Our theory of the problem is that bad people are responsible, right, with bad attitudes. Bad attitudes are on decline, but inequality ain't going nowhere. How do we make sense of that? And that is the same problem that we have when we're looking at the issues of policing, right? In the face of declining prejudice, you have experienced, not perceived, but experienced racial inequality. How do we make sense of that and then fix it? Okay. When I say that our understanding and our language for racism is jacked up, this is what I mean. Because even in social psychology, which is a discipline predicated on the one observation that says that situations are more powerful than character in determining behavior, even in social psychology, we peculiarly study racial discrimination and racial bias as if they are the same thing, as if prejudice and character are tantamount to behavior, and that behavior is only predicted by character. That's not true. That's a lie that somebody told one day. So that's what I mean when I say our language is outdated. So what language should we use? I'm going to suggest the language of identity traps, which is a frame for contemporary forms of discrimination. It's rooted in human psychological universals. That means just by virtue of being human, you got this stuff, right? If you are human and have a brain, you got this stuff. And it tends to end badly in the domain of identities, okay? And again, there's 2 types. Fast traps and slow traps. Those of you who are readers in the psych domain might be like, this fool trying to bite Danny Kahneman. Dan Kahneman is a Nobel Prize winner in economics, but he's a psychologist. Don't let the smooth taste fool you. And he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. You are correct. I bit this from Danny Kahneman. That's okay. He's cool with it. All right? Me and Danny, we like this. He's my road dog. All right. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is fast and slow traps. Fast traps, what are they? They are automatic. They're uncontrolled. Okay? They have beneath conscious awareness, not thinking, being depleted, short time frame. That tends to bring it about. And if you've ever heard of the term implicit bias, anybody ever heard the term implicit bias? It's becoming popular. The president talks about it now, right? This is what that is. Implicit bias is a kind of fast trap. Does that kind of make sense to folks? Okay. So what I'd like to do, I like to define things and then I like to show things. Okay? I'd like to give you a sort of experience of what a fast trap feels like. So if you would, just say back to me the first word that comes to mind when I ask you these questions. We're going to do it together. It's going to be fun. Okay? All right. So what kind of music did Peter, Paul, and Mary play? Okay. The people in the front, no, it's folk music. I'm going to have to change this up sometime soon. So what kind of music did Peter, Paul, and Mary play? Okay. What's the wire in the center of a wheel? Spoke. Okay. What comes out of the end of a cigarette? Comedian tells you this, makes you laugh. Okay, if you have no money, you are. And what's the white part of an egg? 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 Yes! Thank you very much. I'll be here all week. Make sure to tip your wait staff and try the veal. Okay. Some folks are looking like, why is everybody laughing? The white part of an egg is the white part of the egg. Come on, folks. If I walked up to you on the street and I asked what's the white part of the egg, first you'd be like, why are you asking me? And then the next part would be, the answer is in the question. Okay? Right? Now, what you are supposed to take from this is not just that I am a wizard that can control your minds, though that is totally true. Okay? It's that I am a wizard that can control your behavior. Because you said it out loud, didn't you? Almost everybody in the room, 3 and 4 times. By the way, my record is 7. I'm trying to get to 10. Okay. And just word to the wise, all y'all gonna be like, oh, we saw Dr. Phil come, blah, 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 and he did this folk joke thing, let me do it to you. You're gonna do it, you're gonna fail, and you're gonna feel bad about yourselves, okay? Don't do it without the pictures, okay? Doesn't work without the pictures. I'm trying to help y'all out, okay? So the deal is that our brains are what Susan Fiske calls cognitive misers. They're trying to conserve energy. It's why we get to work, right, or get to school or get to class without thinking about every step in front of ourselves. It's why we can hold a conversation while we're tying our shoes. We overlearn certain things so our brains can take shortcuts. And that's adaptive. It's healthy. It's good. But it leads to reliable type errors. We were thinking of things that rhymed with folk. All the other answers were that. I gave you relatively little time. And then I asked you a question having to do with eggs. What's an egg answer that rhymes with folk? Well, it's yolk. Here is the most important thing, and I believe this in my heart. I don't think the fact that any of y'all said yolk means that you are yokists. Okay. And y'all get me, right? It's not revealing of anything having to do with character. Y'all are familiar with the English language. You understand that there are different parts of an egg. That's kind of all that's required here, right? You didn't need to break out a rhyming dictionary. It's not a high level. It doesn't mean that y'all are dumb. It doesn't mean that anybody is gullible, right? I've been doing this for a while. It doesn't reveal anything about character, and that's the important thing. And this is fun and funny, right? Again, don't try it at home. But the same associations, the same kind of associative network, can be a lot less fun and funny, and it's harder to resist the idea that it reveals something about character when it's women being overly emotional, right? When it's Latinos being illegal people, whatever that could possibly mean, and when it's black people being criminal. I want to go to slow traps. I do fast traps and slow traps in that order because fast traps are really, they're kind of cool. Like I can do that folk yoke thing and folks are still thinking about it. I see people still writing it down. They're trying to draw the pictures for themselves. They say, he said to do it with pictures. I'm gonna draw some pictures. But it's epistemologically seductive. And let me say what I really mean. I mean it's epistemologically lazy. We started with this idea that it's bad people. It's contaminated hearts and minds. And fast traps, it's too easy to think about them as residing inside of people. So we move to slow traps because I think that helps folks get to a different conception, a broader conception of what we mean when we're talking about racial bias in policing. All right, so what is a slow trap? It's conscious. It's self-directed, right? It's negotiated over time. You know when you're going through it, right? You understand it's the opposite of a fast trap. And it tends to be not just self-directed, but threats to the self-concept. It's a threat about how I think about myself. Now, in the first one, I kind of let y'all make fun of yourself. I like to give examples. Let me go ahead and try to make fun of myself. So holiday seasons are coming up, which means some of y'all are going to go shopping. Okay? I go shopping with my significant other. Imagine you're going shopping with your significant other. And if you're like me, very early on in the shopping experience, I end up sitting on the boyfriend bench next to a bunch of bags that have stuff in it that don't belong to me, but it'd be really bad if somebody took it away. I got nothing better to do with my eyes than to people watch, right? I'm from Philadelphia, right? So the greatest city in the history of the world. And so I'm going to malls. And I'm people watching in malls. People watching in the King of Prussia Mall, there ain't nothing like it, okay? So your eyes got nothing better to do. You see someone of your preferred gender, you watch them because you got nothing better to do with your eyes. You just keep watching them until you come back and make eye contact with your significant other. It was like, oh yeah, they were cute. Yeah. Would you like it if I looked a little bit more like they do? To which the appropriate response is always, now see, I wasn't even, okay, I was looking, but you look fine. It's not that I would want you to be, it's more of a, why are you walking away? And the reason that is the appropriate response is because what you want to say is, I am a good and loyal partner. But you know good and damn well that was not the question that they asked. So you're trying to fit your answer up into their question, right? And the whole time watching yourself not say anything meaningful. And this again is funny if it's not happening to you, but it will drive you to distraction and you'll perform much less well. It's less funny when the questions are more serious, like, I'm smart enough, right? In the examples I'm going to show you from some of our law enforcement experiments, I'm man enough, right? And to every single person in this room at some point in your life, it will be, I'm not racist, right? Now, how do you answer any of these questions in the affirmative and end the discussion? I took my racism test, I got a 64, I passed. It doesn't work that way. These are questions that cannot be answered in the affirmative in a conversation. They need to be demonstrated with your life over time. And in a context where you believe that the critique is legitimately held by other people, you don't have to believe that the critique is legitimate and true of you, but you believe other folks hold that critique, it's almost impossible to perform in the same way that you would otherwise. This is human, right? You're not a bad person, you're not overly sensitive, you're not weak character. This is just human, and it can have some really unfortunate consequences. So I want to move through and show you some examples of this, both in the laboratory and in the real world, and then sort of build out from that, if that makes sense to folks. Folks there with me? You got fast and slow traps? Yeah? Vaguely? You got one amen. I think that's good enough to go. All right, so 2009, like I said, we ended racism, and it was great. And then immediately afterwards, in the New York Post, there was this cartoon that some of you may remember. All right? It was two officers who shot and killed a chimp, said they'll have to find someone else to write the next stimulus bill. Now, somehow, some people took that to mean that the authors of this cartoon were likening Obama to a chimp that needed to be put down. And that's obviously ridiculous. Why would anybody think that that's what the author meant? There had never been any other representations of Obama as a monkey in the 2008 election since he was inaugurated into office. Right, you see that I work through sarcasm. Have you guys caught on to that yet? All right, so again, this is Tommy Lott. This is the Negro ape metaphor. There were a lot of folks who did not know that this was even a thing prior to Obama running. Right, I had students who were like, I have literally never heard of that before. Right, that black people are like monkeys, never even heard of that before. We all heard about it now. And so what Jennifer Eberhardt, who's a collaborator of mine, and I did, is we thought, what are the consequences to this in the most severe ways in which people engage with the state? Okay? So we took 425 death-eligible cases in the greatest city in the history of the world from 79 to 99. Okay? Death-eligible case is when someone's been convicted of a crime, a capital crime, and the death penalty is on the table. And then, just so you know, it's 39 white and 386 black convicts. That's its own study. This is from the David Baldus data set. We took a subset of this, about roughly proportional. And one of the many wonderful things about Philadelphia is that back when there was this thing called newspapers, y'all are too young for that, but there used to be this thing that you would unfold and ink would get on your hands. It was great. There was only one reputable newspaper in Philadelphia. All the rest of them just were advertisements for great hip-hop shows. But the Philadelphia Inquirer was one reputable news source. So we coded the Philadelphia Inquirer, all the news coverage of these death-eligible cases, for words like ape, or jungle, or monkey, or wild, savage, things like that. And we asked people later about these words. We said, what animal does it describe? They said it describes a monkey. You guys get what we're looking for. So these are the results. Okay? So over here we're looking about just the average number of ape metaphors, the average times that the words like ape and monkey were in the newsprint. Everybody there with me? You understand what we're doing? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Okay. Folks in the back understand too? Y'all know I can see you, right? All right, cool. And we're looking at black and white defendants controlling for the number of articles that got written. Some stories get a lot of articles, some stories just get one, but controlling for the number of articles that got written. The number of ape-related metaphors. Some of y'all, I see you tensing up. Yeah, the news is going to be bad. Get ready. Okay. This is for white defendants, and this is for black defendants. 2 to about 8.5. What about folks who were sentenced to life versus folks who were sentenced to death? Okay. And now controlling for not just the number of articles, but socioeconomic status of the victim, socioeconomic status of the defendant, a whole bunch of aggravating and mitigating circumstances. Again, this is taken from the legal sociologist David Baldus, who put together the data set for us. What do we see? Well, those who were given a life sentence, about 6 metaphors per article. Those who were given death, about 13. Now, can I see a show of hands? Who's in here trying to do empirical social science? Studying anything where empirical social science is happening? Got 1, 2. The hands are low. Y'all don't want to be called out. Okay. I see folks in the back. This is important to the people who care about causality, because this is not a causal story, and that's actually the thing that's most important about it. It is not that the fast traps caused, right, the newspaper articles to influence the sentencing. In fact, by law, the folks who are there for sentencing are not supposed to be reading any of those articles. So the point is, whatever's out there in the culture and in the ether, it's available to the journalists and it's available to the jury. That's actually more distressing than if one caused the other. If one caused the other, we'd do something about the journalism. But that's not what's going on here. The fast traps are available, they're in our minds, and they clearly have some association with the outcomes here of when the state chooses to execute people. So again, this is, pun intended, this is kind of arresting stuff. It's at the tail end of the criminal justice story. But I don't want folks to be seduced by the ease with which we go to the fast traps. It's not just about things that are in people's heads. And so I want to transition to the slow traps. All right? Now, I used to have to do a really long introduction for the slow trap we're going to talk about, which is masculinity threat, but I don't really need to do that anymore. Because this is the testimony in the deposition of Darren Wilson. He said, talking about the shooting of Michael Brown, he grabs my gun, says, "You were too much of a pussy to shoot me." I am not saying that what Darren Wilson did was right. I am not saying that what Darren Wilson did was wrong. I am saying manhood was at stake during this interaction. Everybody see that? Later on, Darren Wilson is about 2 inches shorter, about 30 pounds lighter than Michael Brown. It says that he felt like a 5-year-old holding onto the leg of Hulk Hogan. Manhood is at stake in this interaction. And we've worked in departments where a distressing number of the use of deadly force incidents are immediately preceded by man-to-man flirting or the use of a sexual orientation epithet. Literally, fag is a deadly word. Manhood is at stake in many of these interactions. So what my team and I did, we took a bunch of, we were in Denver, and I can reveal that here because you're about to see someone identify themselves. We took a bunch of patrol officers, we recruited them and compensated them. 63 patrol officers, of which 57 were men, which again is its own study. We divided them into high versus low masculinity threat officers, and we showed them either black, white, or Latino suspects. And what we were measuring is just aggression, and it will not be clever the way we measure it. You'll be able to tell. Now, so what is masculinity threat? Right? It's a slow trap. It's a thing we know we got going on. Ask any guy if they've ever been accused saying you're not a real man. They will remember, right? And they know what that feels like. But the definition is really just macho. Right? It's best understood that way. I have to demonstrate my manhood all the time. Because manhood is, in this conception, hard fought, hard won, easily lost. It's precarious. Now, it makes sense why macho officers would be involved in more use of force incidents, kind of broadly. But why would they be involved in racially disparate numbers of use of force? Well, if I have to demonstrate my manhood, am I going to choose a masculine target or a feminine target? A masculine target. Just masculine enough, maximum masculinity that I can still take him. So I'm not going to, chest up to Shaq, But if Shaq got a little brother comes up to about here on me, it's on. Okay? Now there's this stereotype that black people are hyper-masculine, though I am evidence to the contrary every day. Some of y'all laughing too hard, that's mean. But the idea is that not stemming from prejudice, but stemming from the association between blackness and masculinity, I am now going to sort my aggression differently. Right? You can see that might lead to disparate targeting of people in order to prove my manhood. Does that make sense to folks? All right, we call this the macho recognized macho hypothesis. So what I'm about to show you is we ran them through the use of deadly force training facilitator. For the nerds in the room, that's like the X-Men's danger room. Okay, yeah, and the nerds have now identified themselves. You know where they are. Great. And everybody else, essentially what it is you have a room with not quite this high ceiling, but one whole wall is a projection screen. At the back is someone who's basically doing a choose your own adventure. Right? They get to say, all right, it's going to go this way versus that way. The officer has a retrofitted 9mm. It's got a laser pointer in it. It's a real 9mm, same weight, same action on it, but it's a laser pointer, so we can see where they shoot. And they're used to going through these as if they are real scenarios because that's how they get trained to use deadly force responsibly. One of the things we've talked about is that the situation threats are going to lead, situational threats to identity create group-based inequality. This is not bigotry, it's human psychology. So what you can do here is you can try and randomize it. And it turns out that randomization can be a great racial boon, which you hadn't thought of before because we didn't have the language of traps. We didn't have access to this. Okay. So why does this work? Let me make sure that I'm good on time here. Oh, I'm good on time, hooray. Why does this work? Does this approach work? Does the science work? I want to talk for a second about the traditional civil rights model. Because there's a theory of change that comes from the ways in which people have been doing civil rights work for a really long time. I'm calling this a traditional civil rights model because they say that the problem stems from either ignorance, apathy, or bigotry, or some combination of all of the above. Okay? And the science gives us a fifth option, right? An evidence-based approach working backwards from the disparities and remaining agnostic about what role bigotry plays in this, or apathy, or lack of information, gives us a fifth option, which is traps. And here's why I think it's useful and why it works. So let's do a thought exercise. What happens if you go into a police department, as I do regularly, and you have a police chief who is a good person, as I do regularly, says, I understand that there's racial inequality in the world, and I understand that my officers are caught up in that. And probably there's some way in which we're contributing to that, but I want to do the right thing. Now, I'm seeing folks shaking your heads. I want to be really clear. I'm a black man from West Philadelphia. I graduated high school with Mumia Abu Jamal's son. My first experiences with law enforcement were not positive. My subsequent experiences with law enforcement professionally have been almost embarrassingly good. You walk into almost every major city, and you have a chief who, when the cameras are off, will say, I want to be a force for racial justice. And I am stuck, not quite sure, figuring out how. I'll leave y'all with furrow brows and confused about that, but it's true. So imagine you walk into a room and someone is saying that, and you come at them with the traditional civil rights model. You don't know, you don't care, or you're a racist. That is not going to be a fun exchange. And someone who could have been your ally and who wants to work and shares your values is now believing that you are going to be in there calling them names and not helping them meet their goals. So if we lead with an evidence-based model as opposed to a traditional civil rights model, doesn't mean we can't go back to it. I've worked in police departments where the chief is racist as heck and there ain't nothing to be done about it except get a new chief. But you don't necessarily need to lead with it. All right? So again, see how this plays out. The public belief, it's character. We see racism in policing, we see disparate outcomes. It's because the policies or the people are racist. Police response is, yeah, no, that's not what's going on. Right? And even if police acknowledge the problem, there's no way to measure it. How are you going to measure whether they are or aren't racist, right? Again, there's no racism test. You can't pass it. So there's no basis for trust. An evidence-based model creates metrics for the injustice. We create ways of measuring the traps and demonstrating that the traps are part of what's responsible for what's going on. This removes the character issue sometimes, right? Not all the time. Again, it's not like you don't have racist officers. It's not like you don't have racist chiefs. It's not like you don't have racist folks in the community who are really encouraging policies that create all kinds of disparities. But it takes the issue of character off the table, at least as an opening salvo, and so people can trust the process even when they can't trust each other. I put this out here because I am deceptively old. It doesn't look like it. I am 186 years old, right? This is what, you live in LA, you can do things to try and save that, but, right? I'm not gonna be here doing this, but the folks in this room, you are. So thinking creatively about what might cause this and what solutions are available to me, thinking broader than what's been done before, is incredibly vital. Because racism is not gonna just stand still, it's gonna look different 10, 15 years from now. It looks different now than it did 10, 15 years ago. So we've got to be creative and innovative around it in the same way where we are in the tech industry, in civil engineering. We got to be innovative when we come to racial justice. So let me give you an example of that for my dismount here. Right? So how does this work in real time? We had good friends in Las Vegas, because who doesn't have good friends in Las Vegas? And they asked us to come in. They said, we have a problem. We think we got too much use of force going on. We're not sure that it's disparate, right? It's not super outsized compared to our arrests, at least. But we got too much use of force going on. We don't know why. We said, all right, we started the legal process of being able to get involved, and before we actually even got in, they gave us a whole bunch of offense reports. I went through, I was like, use of force, it's a foot patrol. Foot pursuit, foot pursuit, foot pursuit, bike pursuit. No, they fell off the bike, it's a foot pursuit. Foot pursuit, noticing a pattern. Literally, the first 20 I looked at were 100% foot pursuits. What the heck is going on with that, right? So there's a legacy of mistrust between the ACLU and DOJ. They asked them to investigate. The research already started, right? And what we did with the community is we set parameters around how we would look at this. And it turns out, before we get to that, it turns out that foot pursuit ends up being a big problem and a big part of the solution. So everybody's watched some kind of procedural crime drama, and there's a foot pursuit. People are running, right? And there's an old black officer who tackles the guy and gets up and says, I'm too old for this. That is not how it works in real life, right? By the way, Ride Along is not just a movie with Kevin Hart. You should go take one, right? It's there, useful. I've been on number of Ride Alongs in a vest, carrying all this, lagging very far behind, panting and wheezing. And my politics on violence are to the left of Gandhi. And yet behind every corner there's someone who could be there waiting to hurt me. This individual might have a weapon on them, we don't know. And when I actually catch up to them, to the left of Gandhi is now ready to go ahead and give him a shot to the kidneys for the price of making me run. So we went to Las Vegas, we said, okay, so what's your foot pursuit policy? They said, our what? Oh, you don't have a foot pursuit policy. Well, what would it look like to try and change the situation, change the context, so that masculinity threat, or in this case adrenaline, isn't playing a large role? What if, since people tend to give up in foot pursuits because they understand there's no way for them to go, the first person on scene controls, and it's the second person who goes hands-on. It's the second person who puts them in bracelets, who puts them in handcuffs. Well, when we put that policy into place, from year 1 to year 2, 23% in total use of force reduction across the board, and 11% reduction in officer-related injuries. So when DOJ finally does get invited in, they do a full investigation. They use CNA to do an investigation. They're all up trying to mess up the way the police do their business. By the way, it's incredible. It's not just inconvenient. It's a terror to law enforcement to be under DOJ investigation. Like, it really feels awful, and it makes it hard to do the job. DOJ gets done with their investigation. DOJ says, yeah, you guys should just do that stuff. That policy you guys put in place, that kind of solves it. No consent decree. That's good news. DOJ is happy. The community is happy. Las Vegas Metro is happy. That's how that stuff works. So with that kind of as an example, we started doing this police department by police department, but before Trayvon Martin and clearly before Ferguson, we saw a need to do something sort of broader and national. So I said at the beginning, there's no federal data on police behavior, nothing on stops and use of force. Well, with Department of Justice, the White House Domestic Policy Council, major cities chiefs, we're working to fix that. We're putting together a kind of justice GPS. Okay, which is the National Justice Database. Right now we've got commitments from a little bit over a third, or departments that cover a little bit over a third of the nation by population. To get stops, use of force, pedestrian vehicle stops, use of force, crime data, and to have most of the officers also take these kinds of surveys. Not so we can take it back to the officer, but so we have a sense of how the traps are influencing the behavior. And we're also doing, as Jason pointed out in my intro, the National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice, where we're doing all these interventions that have worked. Right? There's 3 pillars. There's racial reconciliation, procedural justice, and the fast and slow traps. We're doing it in 6 cities because we've done them each separately, but we've never put them all together before. So we're putting together a kind of justice gumbo, right? See if it works so that we can scale it up. So there's a model for police reform that doesn't criminalize policing, nor does it criminalize black and brown communities. All right. Also, this is the name because DOJ is great at naming things. All right, so don't ever leave here by saying Dr. Phil told me that bigotry is dead and it's all about traps now. That's just not the case. Racism is still alive, it's well-funded, it's organized, it's doing quite well. Okay? But it is the case that inequality is often not the product of intent, and we still need a morally compelling language to talk about that. And I would argue that traps may help. The benefits of the framework, it foregrounds context, right? But it doesn't let individuals off the hook. We walk into a room, sometimes there's a trap there, but you can still be a habitually fallen into a trap, right? Nobody wants to be that. So I hope that it can allow for a compelling language. Regardless, it also offers multiple routes to discrimination and a language for broader accountability, right? Again, TCR is still useful, but if you lead with the evidence base, it can be helpful. And with that, let me be done. Let me make sure that there's time for questions and say thank you. There's lots of much smarter people. They just don't get to travel to William Paterson. These are the folks that help me do the research. So thanks very much. Yeah, I'll just stand and take them. So do we have any questions?
If you could speak into the microphone, that would be great. Thank you.
My name is Adita. I'm a criminology and criminal justice major here in William Paterson. My first question is on the aspect of masculinity. In the case of Rodney King, what do you think happened there? Because it wasn't a case of masculinity, because you had one cop lynch him, and then the rest of the cops joined in, and I think you kind of created a norm there. But it wasn't an issue of masculinity. I mean, you had so many men around him, so I don't think there was any masculinity threat there.
Okay, so I got to push back on one word, and I'm not sure if you meant it, but the word lynch there, lynching in American history has a very particular meaning, and we should be using it carefully as we talk about racialized violence. I think a lot of people felt like they were witnessing a lynching when they saw that many people on one individual. But to say that one person did it, I would push back against that. But let me, the question's a great one in terms of what are the processes in these things that we're seeing on videos. And so let me give you two answers. One that's fundamentally and thoroughly unsatisfying to you, I'm sure, and then another one that tries to make up for that. So the first one is, in any given instance, it can be difficult to take apart what's going through anybody's mind or what's happening in the situation. Because in a given instance, you kind of have to peer inside the head of the person. And that's not something that I have the power to do. I can control your minds, but I can't see into them. And so I can't really speak to what the officers were going through in the Rodney King beating. What I can say, though, is that absolutely masculinity threat functions even when you are in the majority. Because if you've got a highly masculine target, but you know you can win, in fact, you know you can win because you've got 4 or 5 guys with you, right? It gives, in fact, more license. And if someone is resisting your authority, and your manhood is tied up in notions of your ability to control other people's outcomes, then any resistance of authority is also a threat to your manhood. So even in situations where it seems like it wouldn't play a role, and I get this resistance, there's almost like an ideological commitment to the idea that bigotry is what's driving the bus. It is racist. It is racism. It is unfair and not okay. But these mechanisms can still be at play in the midst of all of that. So I'm not saying it was or that it wasn't, but it certainly were, the conditions were ripe for many of the things that I've been talking about today to be playing a role.
All right, now my second question is about the stop and frisk research in New York City that was conducted. Most of the stop and frisk was done for furtive movement, and most of the people that were stopped, of course, were from Latino and Black race. My question is, do you think there should be a stronger protocol for what a furtive behavior is, because there's no legal definition of what it is?
That's right, there is no legal definition of a furtive movement. You're asking great questions that I kind of have to cop out of. And the reason being is that, so I work with the NYPD on helping them to redefine their stop and frisk policy. So here is an answer that I can give, not specific to NYPD. 1,000% it is the case that if I am going to be able to detain someone, which is taking away a basic liberty, I should be able to articulate a constitutionally justifiable and fully defined reason for doing that. Okay?
Thank you.
Great.
I'm not asking a question, I'm just trying to give the mic to someone if they don't want to come all the way up front.
you. In the recent case with Ahmed Muhammad and the pseudo bomb clock in Texas, what was your opinion standing about how the teacher handled the situation and then how the cops handled the situation afterwards?
So you're talking about the clock.
Yeah, because the teacher thought it was a bomb, and if you look at what he brought in, it was the insides of a clock, but it did look questionable. So would you say that was like a case of discrimination and racism, or would you say that the teacher had a reasonable premise for reporting that?
So the framework for that, I want to expand just a little bit. Okay, so there was more than one teacher that Ahmed engaged with on his way to the class where he was eventually detained. And the first one said, "Oh, you made a clock. Cool. Maybe don't take that out, right? Because I think it looks kind of a little bit shady." Ahmed said, "Yeah, okay, fine, but I want to take it out because I'm proud of it, right? At least that's what his version of the story is." If you believe it looks like a bomb, and I think that it's not completely unreasonable that someone believes that it looks like something sinister, then you're taking a public safety stance. The question is, did you believe it looked like a bomb more or less because of the person who was carrying it? And again, it's not my job, and I think it's not useful for us to have a conversation about what was in the heads of the individuals. But I do think that the response that we got nationally is informative, right? That it was really difficult for folks who live in Muslim communities to feel as if that child was treated the same way that a white child would have been treated. And if it's really difficult for a community to believe that that's possible, that's telling us something. It doesn't mean that the teacher is or isn't racist. It doesn't mean that the officer's response is or isn't racist. But it does mean that we need to be looking more carefully about how this gets handled. Right? So the specifics of the judgment of the teacher is not something that I'm interested in getting into. The response from the school community is something that I'm interested in getting into, which is that at no point in time did Ahmed say, "I am interested in creating a scare or a panic." At every point in time and at every turn, he said, "It's a clock. That's all it is. I was proud of it and I brought it in." Children that go home and do nerdy things and then try and bring that to school because they're proud of it should be encouraged in that. And at each and every opportunity to do that, provided that we're doing it in a safe way, we should be encouraging it. As soon as it was identified from early on that it wasn't anything dangerous, whatever conversations about appropriate use of technology or whatever needs to be had, and then that child needs to be congratulated and brought back into the classroom. Right? So the specifics of the teacher, not my bag. The specifics of any individual reaction, not my bag. But the way in which we encourage learning in spaces where people are afraid that because of stereotypes about their group, they'll be treated differently, that is my bag. And that's where I think I can come down very strongly in terms of that particular incident. The school mishandled it. From that point when they understood it was a clock, the school mishandled it.
Hi, I'm Zoe Brenham. I'm a social psychologist here. Thank you so much for coming. Your talk was amazing. And your data is so compelling with the low masculinity threat and the high masculinity threat. And I'm just wondering, because I teach my students in social psychology all the time about the weapons identification task and the shooter bias. Is that variable, is it applicable in those situations as well, in those more traditional, or let me say just the ones that have been used widely in social psychology? Can I tell my students that this could potentially be a moderator, well, where low masculinity threat would not produce the implicit bias, and high masculinity threat would? That's one question. Another is, because that is so compelling, I'm just wondering, can it be applied to female police officers, or what do you have to say about that, or have you studied them at all? Can we use it to understand their behaviors as well?
Okay, so if I'm understanding both of your questions, the first one is a peculiarly nerdy question, right? It's a pretty narrow nerdy question. And the second one is significantly broader. So let me do the nerdy first, because I feel you, right? So I would think about fast and slow traps in the same way that Kahneman talks about thinking fast and slow. Not that system 2 things or thinking slower is a panacea to everything, but that there's two routes to errors, reliable errors. So implicit biases or fast traps, that's one route to errors. And then slow traps are an entirely different route there. And they sometimes overlap. So if I'm engaged, if I've got a slow trap going on, if I've stepped in it, right? I'm experiencing stereotype threat, and officers experience it all the time. This idea, these people think I'm racist, is the most common thing I hear in police departments, right? That's cognitively depleting, which means I'm more susceptible to implicit bias or fast traps. So they're two separate routes, but that they overlap. I want to add one addendum to that. It's important to get the distinction between the laboratory and the field, because shooter bias is a real and robust effect in the laboratory that does not translate well into things that predict racially disparate policing in the field. Masculinity threat does. Okay. To your second question about masculinity threat and women, here's the interesting thing about women police officers. They are very rarely concerned about their masculine self-concept. Very, very rarely. Folks don't get that's a joke, okay? And so the deal is that it turns out if you want to make a department more representative of the community it serves, please hire more women, because major city law enforcement is 87% men. That's not representative, but we don't hear lots of conversations about that. It's about racial diversity, not about gender diversity, right, or gender equity. And the reason why I say hire more women is not just because I think that gender equity and gender diversity matters, but because of the way in which it matters. The more women in a police department, the less use of force generally, right? And why would that be? For lots of different reasons, but one of them is that women are peculiarly good at disarming or de-escalating men's masculinity threat. Why? Because they've been dealing with that stuff their whole lives. So it turns out that having women in police forces doing patrol is a really good thing, with one caveat. And I don't know why this is. No, don't worry, it's going to be fine. I don't know exactly why this is, why this number is the cutoff, but you have to be over 5'2", okay? You can be an officer under 5'2", but if you're under 5'2" and you're a woman, you look like the most high masculinity threat men in the world. And the explanation for it is that if you've ever done a ride-along with a woman officer, and again, I encourage you to do multiple ride-alongs. First one I went to was shocking to me because the first three houses we stopped at were all like noise disturbances or concerns for domestics. Someone comes to the door and says, "Oh, who ordered the stripper?" Right, that's the totally appropriate reaction, like, how? Because it's funny at first and then you recognize it's incredibly sexist and also is threatening, not just from a sexual predation standpoint, but also in terms of that woman's capacity to keep control of that situation. So if you're a particularly diminutive woman and you're not with a partner, right, you may feel the need to demonstrate your capacity to use coercive force in order to keep the whole situation under control. Right? So we do study it. It needs significantly more research, but there are distinct moderators that gender plays. Okay, we got time for one more question, I'm being told. So no pressure, but make it the best question in the history of the world.
Taking nationwide institutional racism as a given, what do you think is ultimately more harmful for Black lives? A police officer with a bigoted concept of Black identity, or a police officer whose own identity is defined by the code of masculinity?
There's a lot in that question. So for those of you who didn't quite hear it, taking institutional racism as a given, what's more threatening? And I'll dumbify it. A racist cop or a high macho cop? For the physical safety of the communities that they're tasked with serving, almost always the high masculinity threat cop. The issue is they're not uncorrelated. Macho and bigotry go together, like peas and carrots, peanut butter and jelly, they go together. The bigger threat on a use of force call is the masculinity, because it ends up being more volatile and ends up escalating situations much faster. And it's also in part because we're not good as a society of taking care, the men in our society in particular are not good at taking care of an officer's threatened masculinity. But Black folks have had lots of practice dealing with officer racism. So there's a kind of socialization that happens in Black households traditionally that allows them to de-escalate a situation where they're being seen as less than. And on that happy note, thank you very much.